Hi, Alex. Today, I thought we could talk about something that's really important for English learners: how to improve English reading skills. Reading is such a fundamental part of language learning, isn't it?
Absolutely, Myra. It's not only about understanding the words on the page, but also about expanding our vocabulary, improving our grammar, and even enhancing our writing and speaking skills. So, where do you think we should start?
Well, I think one of the first things is choosing the right reading materials. It's crucial to start with something that's at the right level of difficulty. If it's too easy, we don't learn much. If it's too hard, we might get frustrated and give up.
You're so right. For beginners, simple picture books or short stories with lots of illustrations can be great, and they can help build confidence and get used to reading in English. What about for more intermediate learners?
Intermediate learners could start with graded readers. These are books that are specifically designed for language learners at different levels. They usually have explanations of difficult words and grammar points at the back. Also, reading newspapers, or magazines like Time for Kids or National Geographic Kids, can be really beneficial. The articles are short, interesting, and cover a wide range of topics.
That sounds like a good idea. And for advanced learners, they can move on to classic literature or contemporary novels. But reading classic literature can be quite challenging because of the old-fashioned language. How can they deal with that?
True, classic literature can be tough. They can start by reading abridged versions first. These are shorter versions that simplify the language. Also, using a good dictionary, like the Oxford English Dictionary or Merriam-Webster, can be a big help. They can look up words they don't understand and read the explanations. Another thing is to read summaries or analyses of the books before or after reading the original text. This can give them a better understanding of the plot and the themes.
Interesting. Now let's talk about reading techniques. Do you have any tips on how to read more effectively?
Sure. Skimming is a great technique. When we skim, we quickly look over the text to get a general idea of what it's about. We look at the headings, subheadings, pictures, and the first and last sentences of each paragraph. This helps us decide if the text is something we want to read more carefully.
I see. And then there's scanning, right? We use scanning when we're looking for specific information, like a name or a date.
Exactly. Scanning is really useful when we're doing research or when we need to find an answer to a specific question. But for in-depth understanding, we need to read carefully, word by word. This is called close reading. When we do close reading, we pay attention to the details, the grammar, the vocabulary, and the way the author uses language.
That makes sense. But sometimes even when we read carefully, we might not understand everything. What should we do then?
Well, we can try to guess the meaning of the words we don't know from the context. Look at the words around the unknown word. What are they talking about? Sometimes we can get a pretty good idea of what the word means just from the context. If that doesn't work, then we can look it up in the dictionary. Also, if there are difficult sentences or passages, we can read them again, slowly, and try to break them down into smaller parts.
Good advice. Another thing I've noticed is that some people read really slowly. How can they improve their reading speed?
Practice is key. The more you read, the faster you'll get. Also, try to avoid subvocalization. That's when we say the words in our head as we read. It slows us down. Instead, try to focus on the visual symbols on the page and let your brain process them directly. Another thing is to use a pointer, like your finger or a pen, to guide your eyes across the page. This can help you read in a more linear way and increase your speed.
That's interesting. I never thought about subvocalization before. Now let's talk about making reading a habit. How can we encourage ourselves to read more often?
Setting goals can be really helpful. For example, you can set a goal to read a certain number of pages or a certain number of books in a month. Also, find a reading buddy. You can both read the same book and then discuss it. It makes reading more fun and also gives you a chance to practice your speaking skills.
That's a great idea. And what about reading in different environments? Do you think that matters?
It can. Some people find it easier to read in a quiet, distraction-free environment. Others prefer a bit of background noise, like soft music or the sound of a coffee shop. It really depends on the person. but it's important to find an environment where you can focus.
True. Now let's talk about reading for different purposes. Sometimes we read for pleasure, and other times we read for information. Do we read differently for these two purposes?
Definitely. When we read for pleasure, we can take our time, enjoy the story, and let our imagination run wild. We don't have to worry too much about understanding every single word. But when we read for information, like when we're reading a textbook or a research paper, we need to be more focused and analytical. We need to look for the main ideas, the supporting details, and the conclusions.
That's a good point. And what about reading online? There's so much information available on the internet. How can we make the most of it?
Online reading can be a bit tricky because there are so many distractions, but we can use the same techniques we use for reading printed materials. We can skim the page to see if it's relevant, and then read more carefully if it is. Also, be careful about the sources. Make sure the information is reliable. Look for websites that are run by reputable organizations or experts.
Right. Now let's talk about reading aloud. Do you think it's important?
I think it's extremely important. Reading aloud helps with pronunciation, intonation, and fluency. It also helps us to really understand the rhythm of the language. We can read aloud short stories, poems, or even just passages from a book. And, if possible, record yourself and listen back. You can then identify areas where you need to improve.
That's a great tip. Now let's say someone has been reading for a while but still doesn't feel like they're making much progress. What could they do?
They could try joining a reading group. In a reading group, you can discuss the books you've read with other people. You can hear different perspectives and learn new things. Also, consider taking an English reading course. A teacher can provide structured guidance and feedback.
Good suggestions. Now let's talk about the role of vocabulary in reading. How can we build our vocabulary while reading?
When we come across new words, we can write them down in a notebook. Then, look up the definitions. Write down example sentences, and try to use the words in our own writing or speaking. Another thing is to make flashcards. We can write the word on one side and the definition on the other. Review the flashcards regularly. Also, try to notice word roots, prefixes, and suffixes. This can help us guess the meaning of new words.
That's a lot of great advice. Now let's talk about reading complex texts like academic papers. They can be really intimidating. How can we approach them?
First, start by reading the abstract. This gives you a summary of the whole paper. Then, look at the headings and subheadings to get an idea of the structure. Read the introduction carefully to understand the problem the paper is trying to solve. As you read the main body, take notes on the key points. And don't be afraid to read it more than once. Academic papers are often dense and require multiple readings to fully understand.
That sounds like a good strategy. Now, let's say someone wants to start reading more in English but doesn't know where to begin. What would be your first piece of advice?
I would say, start small. Find a short story or an article that you're interested in. It could be about a hobby, a movie, or a celebrity. Read it at your own pace. Don't worry about making mistakes or not understanding everything. Just focus on enjoying the process, and as you get more comfortable, gradually increase the difficulty level.
Great advice. Well, Myra, this has been a really informative conversation about improving English reading skills. I'm sure our listeners will find it really helpful.
I hope so too, Alex. Reading is such an amazing way to learn English, and I'm glad we could share some tips and tricks with our audience.